What I want to talk to you about today is something that sits at the very foundation of how we live, think, and ultimately succeed or struggle. And that is the brain's capacity to rewire itself. This is not some abstract philosophical idea. This is grounded in real biology, in fact, the very idea that you are stuck. In your life, your patterns, your behaviors, that idea is not only misleading, it's biologically inaccurate. Because here's the truth, the brain you woke up with this morning is not the same brain you're going to go to bed with tonight. It is changing right now as we speak, and the question is, what is it changing into? Every action you take, every thought you reinforce, every environment you spend time in, these are all instructions. These are commands being executed by your nervous system, and over time, those commands are sculpting the structure and function of your brain. That's the science of neuroplasticity, and it's not just happening when you're young, it's happening your whole life. Now, let's zoom in. Let's talk about that experience many of us have, the feeling of being stuck. You know exactly what I'm referring to. The cycle where you say to yourself, why do I keep doing this? Why do I keep thinking this way? I want to change, I try to change, but something keeps pulling me back. The answer, biologically speaking, is patterns. Neural circuits that have been reinforced so many times that they've become your default. Think of them as deeply grooved trails in a forest. The more you walk them, the easier they are to follow. Eventually, they're so clear, so familiar, your brain just takes them automatically. You're not stuck because you're incapable. You're stuck because your brain is efficient, and that's actually a good thing. Efficiency is what allows us to operate without thinking through every single action. But it's also what keeps us trapped in loops, habits of thought, habits of emotion, habits of behavior. So what do we do with that? We begin with awareness, but not the vague kind. I'm talking about scientific awareness. Understand this, your brain is made up of billions of neurons. These neurons communicate through synapses. And when certain synapses fire together repeatedly, they strengthen. That's the Hebbian principle. Neurons that fire together, wire together. So if every morning you wake up and your first thought is dread or stress or doubt, and you repeat that for days, weeks, months, that's not just a mood. That's a neural pattern. That's a literal pathway that gets more efficient over time, but here's the good news. The same way those patterns were built, they can be broken, they can be rewired, and that's not motivational talk. That is the biological truth of your nervous system. Let me give you an example. When we engage in a new behavior, let's say, starting a journal or taking a cold shower, something unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, our brain resists. Why? Because it's metabolically expensive. New behaviors require more glucose, more oxygen, more attention. The brain doesn't want to waste those resources unless it perceives a reward. But, and this is crucial, if you attach meaning and emotion to that behavior, if you create a why that the brain can connect with, you increase the likelihood that it sticks. Because the amygdala, the brain's emotional processor, starts firing, and once emotion is involved, the brain takes notice. So, if you want to rewire your brain, the formula is simple but not easy. Repeat with emotion. Let me say that again. Repeat. With emotion, it's not enough to say affirmations, you have to feel them. You have to light up the emotional circuits so the brain marks the moment as significant. That's how learning becomes long-term. That's how habits are burned into neural architecture. You might be thinking, okay, I get it. I can change, I can rewire. But why do I always default back? Why do I make progress for a few days and then slide back into old patterns? This is where we talk about the brain's reward system, specifically dopamine. Now, dopamine is often misunderstood. People think it's just the pleasure chemical. That's not quite right. Dopamine is about motivation. It's about drive, seeking, forward movement. And crucially, dopamine is released not just when we achieve something, but in anticipation of a meaningful outcome. This means that if you want to rewire your brain, you have to learn how to generate dopamine along the journey, not just at the destination. You have to become the kind of person who celebrates effort, who finds reward in the process. Because every time you delay gratification, every time you choose growth over comfort and acknowledge that effort, you're teaching your brain, this is the path worth taking. You're reinforcing that neural trail, and over time, that new trail becomes the default. Now let's shift gears and talk about the second major factor, your environment. Because if you're trying to rewire your brain and you're still living in the same mental ecosystem that wired you for stress, self-doubt, or distraction in the first place, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. Environment is not just physical, it's auditory, emotional, digital, social. Every text you receive, every voice you hear, every room you sit in, that's all input, and the brain doesn't ignore input. It processes it, it adapts to it, it rewires in response to it. So, if you wake up and the first thing you do is check your phone and you see negativity, comparison, fear-based news, you are literally priming your nervous system for anxiety. You are flooding your brain with cortisol before your feet even hit the floor. And if you do that enough times, that becomes your baseline. That's not because you're weak. It's because your brain is doing what it's designed to do, adapt to the inputs it's given. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but I can't control everything around me. I can't just move to a monastery or delete the world. And you're right. But you can control what you amplify. Let me explain. Your brain has a filter called the reticular activating system, the RAS. It's the part of the brainstem that decides what information gets through to your conscious awareness. It's like the bouncer at the club. It's deciding, is this important? Should we let it in? And what determines that decision? What you focus on repeatedly. If you constantly focus on what's wrong, what's missing, what scares you, your RAS starts filtering the world through that lens. That's all you see, that's all you feel. But if you shift your focus deliberately, consistently, to what you want to build, to who you want to become, to what you can control, your RAS starts to let those signals in. This is why the environment matters, because your environment is not just influencing you, it's programming your RAS. It's deciding what your brain considers important. So here's what I suggest from both a motivational and a neuroscience standpoint. Start simple, audit your inputs. Who do you follow online? What do you listen to while you drive? What's on your walls, your screensavers, your playlists? Because those aren't decorations, they're directives. They're telling your brain, this is normal, this is valuable, this is what matters. If you change those inputs even a little, you begin to rewire what your brain seeks out. And that's the first domino. There's also a powerful phenomenon called mirror neurons. These are specialized cells in your brain that fire not just when you perform an action, but when you observe someone else doing it. This means the people around you, their habits, their language, their energy, those are not just background noise. They're neurological influencers. If you're around people who complain constantly, or who settle for less, or who reinforce your old identity, they're not just keeping you stuck emotionally. They're keeping you stuck biologically. On the other hand, when you surround yourself with people who challenge you, who inspire you, who normalize excellence, that's not just motivational. That's instructional. Your brain is literally firing new patterns just by being in their presence. This is why proximity is power. You don't need to eliminate everyone from your life, but you do need to elevate your exposure to environments that reflect the future you, not the former you. Whether that's a new podcast, a new mentor, a new routine, whatever it is, let it be something that makes your nervous system feel possibility. Because your brain is always asking, is it safe to grow here? And your environment is the answer. So if you're listening to this right now and you felt stuck or overwhelmed or like you're trying and not breaking through, I want you to understand something clearly. You are not broken. Your brain is simply repeating what it's been taught. And the moment you decide to teach it something new, to repeat a new thought, to practice a new behavior, to step into a new environment, that's the moment change begins. Not in theory, but in your actual biology, because your brain listens, it rewires, and it remembers. When we talk about rewiring the brain, a lot of people focus on the behavior, and that's important. There's no transformation without action. But I want you to understand something even deeper. Behavior is not what wires the brain most effectively. Emotion is. That might surprise you coming from a neuroscientist, but it's the truth. Emotion is the signal that tells your brain, this matters, remember this, rewire around this. It's like a highlighter on the page of your life. Without emotion, experiences just fade, they don't stick. They don't shape us. Let me explain how this works at the biological level. When you experience something emotionally significant, whether it's positive or negative, your amygdala, the emotional processing center of the brain, kicks into gear. The amygdala activates the release of neuromodulators like norepinephrine and acetylcholine, which flood your brain and say, essentially, pay attention. This is important. Those chemicals tell the rest of your nervous system to amplify learning, to strengthen the connections between neurons, and to consolidate memory more rapidly and more deeply. So think about what this means if you're trying to change your behavior. Let's say you want to stop procrastinating or start a new routine, and you're approaching it like a checklist without emotion, without real engagement, then you're not taking advantage of how your brain actually learns. On the other hand, if you link that new behavior to a deep emotional driver, something personal, something that moves you, that behavior becomes sticky. The circuits that encode it grow stronger. That's when rewiring happens. Let me give you a very concrete example. Let's say someone wants to start waking up early and going for a run. They set an alarm, maybe do it once or twice, but it doesn't stick. Why? Because the behavior exists in isolation. It's not anchored. But now imagine that same person ties the behavior to something deeply meaningful. Maybe they say, I'm doing this because I want to be a better parent. I want to have energy when my kids wake up. I want to live long enough to see them grow. That emotional connection triggers the release of those neuromodulators. Now, the early morning run is not just a habit. It's an identity, linked emotionally, driven behavior. That's how it sticks. So I encourage you, don't just set goals. Ask yourself, why does this matter? What's the emotional anchor? What's the cost of not doing it? What's the future I'm building toward? And when you feel resistance, which you will, don't numb it. Don't avoid it, use it. Resistance is not the enemy. It's the activation energy required to shift from autopilot to conscious rewiring. This is where most people go wrong. They hit emotional turbulence and interpret it as a signal to stop. But in neuroscience, we know that emotionally salient moments are the windows of maximum plasticity. That's when the brain is most malleable, most capable of transformation. So when you feel frustration or excitement or fear, don't scroll past it. Don't sedate it, sit with it, feel it fully, and then act. This is what's known in the lab as top-down modulation. It means using conscious awareness to redirect the emotional signal instead of being driven by it. You can train this. In fact, you must train this if you want to rewire anything in your life. Now, let's talk about what happens after that emotional spark. Because emotion is the catalyst, but it's not the whole equation. What really wires the brain is repetition. Repetition is what makes a neural pathway stronger, and the stronger the pathway, the more likely your brain is to default to it. That's how habits are built, through repeated firing of the same circuit until it becomes efficient. But here's the challenge: repetition is boring. We live in a world that glorifies novelty, innovation, disruption, and all that's great. But the truth is, your brain doesn't rewire through novelty, it rewires through consistency. You can't meditate once and expect a calmer mind. You can't do one workout and expect a new body. You can't write one page and call yourself a writer. Your nervous system needs evidence, repeated, frequent, consistent evidence that this new pattern matters. This is how myelination works. Myelin is the insulating layer that wraps around neural axons. Think of it like rubber coating on a wire. The more you repeat a behavior, the more myelin is laid down on the associated pathway. That insulation makes the signal travel faster with less resistance. Over time, it becomes automatic. That's the biology of mastery, and this is where the real shift has to happen. Most people stop repeating because they confuse repetition with stagnation. They think, I've already done this. I'm not getting the dopamine hit anymore. I must be doing something wrong. But in reality, that's the exact point where the brain is building deep strength. It's no longer giving you the high of novelty, but it's giving you something better, long-term wiring. Let me be clear, this is not about motivation. Motivation is great when it shows up, but it's unreliable. What you need is a system. If you build a system that makes repetition easier than non-repetition, you win. That means designing your environment, your schedule, your commitments in such a way that the behavior is the default, not the exception. And every time you complete the behavior, especially when you don't feel like it, you teach your brain that you're serious. That this is not optional, that this is identity, and identity is the final step in the rewiring process. Because the nervous system doesn't just respond to action, it responds to self-image. If you keep saying, I'm trying to become more disciplined, your brain interprets that as optional. But if you say, I am a disciplined person, now every repetition becomes a vote for that identity. There's real neuroscience behind this. The prefrontal cortex, which governs executive function and planning, interacts with the anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors self-image and error detection. When your behavior matches your stated identity, the system says, good, we're aligned. When it doesn't, it triggers a correction signal, guilt, discomfort, a need to resolve the dissonance. That's why identity-based habits are so powerful. You're not just acting, you're reinforcing who you are. And the brain listens to identity, so here's the loop. Emotion lights the spark, repetition strengthens the signal. Identity locks it in. Let me tie this together with something I practice personally and teach in the lab. Whenever I want to build a new habit, I don't start with goals. I start with questions like, what emotional pain am I ready to stop tolerating? What emotional outcome do I crave so deeply that I'm willing to get uncomfortable for it? And then I design a daily rep, a behavior I can do every day, no matter what, even if it's small. And when I do that behavior, I amplify the emotion around it. I don't just check the box. I say to myself, that's who I am now. That's identity reinforcement. That's neurochemical learning, that's the recipe, and when it gets boring, I smile because I know that's the signal. That's how I know I'm laying down real wiring. Now, some people ask, how long does it take to rewire a habit? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on the frequency, the emotional intensity, and the context. But if you're consistent and you repeat it in the right emotional state, you can start to see meaningful changes in as little as 21 days. For deep rewiring, you want 60, 90, even 180 days. But the truth is, if you build your system right, you won't be counting the days. You'll just be living the identity. Let me share a final insight here, something we've seen across multiple studies on behavioral change and neural adaptation. When people associate repetition with growth, they're more likely to stick with it. But when they associate it with failure, meaning they think, I'm still doing this because I haven't arrived yet, they tend to quit. So you have to make the repetition itself the reward. You have to love the rep. You have to see every repetition as a vote for your future, not a sign you haven't arrived. And when you do that, something amazing happens. Your brain starts to crave the process. It starts releasing dopamine not just for the outcome, but for the effort. That's when you've truly rewired not just your habits, but your relationship to the habit. So if you take one thing from this, let it be this: repetition is not failure. Repetition is rewiring. It's the biological signal that says, "This is who I am now." And the more you repeat that, especially in moments of emotional intensity, the more your brain adapts. The more your nervous system aligns with the future you've chosen, and the more unstoppable you become, not because of luck or talent, but because of biology. Because you used the way your brain works to build the life you want.